Welcome, everyone. I'm Sophfronia Scott, Director of the Alma College MFA in Creative Writing, and this is Faculty Friday. This is your opportunity to hear from our talented faculty, and you get to work with them one-on-one as a student in our low residency program. Today, I have with us multi-genre writer Jim Daniels, who teaches poetry, fiction, and nonfiction in our program. And he's also a graduate of Alma College himself, but he is taught in multiple places, including Carnegie Mellon. He has been published in multiple ways, award-winning ways, screenplays, poetry, fiction, stories. His latest work is The Luck of the Fall, a work of fiction, and his newest chapbook will be out in just a couple of months, and it is called Comment Card. Thanks for being with us today, Jim.
Thanks, Sophfronia.
So today we're going to focus on fiction, correct? And developing character.
Yeah. So I think sometimes, and particularly, I focus in on short stories in my own work, which obviously has differences from novel writing in terms of the kind of canvas you're working on to cover character information and how much you can cover. But one of the things that I find that sometimes beginning writers that create an imbalance in their work, in that a lot of things happen. They're plot driven, but we don't maybe care so much about it because we haven't gotten invested in the characters. One example I used, particularly when my own children were young, was the Harry Potter books, and that all these fantastical, crazy things happen, but why they work is we care about these three kids. Yeah. And they're the heart of it, are these three friends. And so when there's bad things coming after them, we're invested in them as characters and in their friendships and things like that. So as a way of slowing yourself down sometimes, like if you have an idea for a story as opposed to having a character that you want to write about, it seems like a very mechanical thing, but I think it's useful. I sometimes give students what I call character information sheets. I'm sure other people do this too, but very basic things, starting with the character's name. And Sophfronia, you know how important that is in terms of, you kind of know when a name is wrong. Sometimes it's hard to articulate why a name is right, but thinking about not being too obvious in terms of having a symbolic name, but something that will seem to fit. Obviously, age is important. And I think one of the things is thinking about what kind of people you know, particularly for beginning writers. Who do you know, and what body of knowledge can you draw on to create characters in terms of how far they are away from your life and your knowledge? Because in some way, you want no matter what point of view you use, and you want your readers to trust the narrator and have us get it to dive into the story without creating this sort of false notes that sort of back us away from that. Another thing, so a lot of these things are things you will not use in the story, but they are things that will maybe make you a little more confident once you write the story, in terms of, well, somebody says something to your character, and how would my character react based on this knowledge of information that I've created about them, and how they're going, and how other people are going to respond to the way they look and their appearance in different kinds of situations.
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry, I was just going to say.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that that's why I feel that we shouldn't be afraid to create characters based on people that we ourselves are intrigued by or attracted to in real life. Like sometimes we're afraid of, like, oh, somebody's going to think I'm writing about them. But to me, that's almost like a cheat sheet, that if you see someone who you're amazed by the way they look or the way they tell jokes, or the way they just move across a room, why not use that? Because if you feel that interest in the person, then the reader will too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good point. And one of the things that happens is that it's hard for writers sometimes to think about just one character, but in a story, there's usually a main character.
Yeah.
Well, in a novel too, but there's that sense of focus. And a lot of short stories are, there's a voice either through first person or, the limited omniscient point of view where you're getting into one character's heads. So yeah, you're intrigued by a character on the outside, and then you think about what makes them this way. And another thing that sometimes people jump over is, what are they doing? I mean, so is it a student? Do they have a job? How do they feel about their job or school? And often this comes down to financial situation, because what kind of job you have, or if you're in school, how you're paying for it, influences a lot of other aspects of your life. And there's a lot of conflicts that come up around that.
Yeah, you get a wonderful lecture about that, Jim. And because so many writers forget that, like they have these people moving through their day, and it's like, well, wait a minute, don't they have a job? You know,
Yeah.
that's a huge opportunity to miss that you miss when you don't think about what they do for work.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't even have to go into the workplace, though. There's a lot of good workplace stories to write. But thinking about what this person who has this kind of job is like when they come home from work can really influence how they interact with other characters.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you talk about other characters, you're thinking about the family background. Do they live alone, or who do they live with? How do they define family? Where do they live? How do they feel about where they live? A lot of times, people are living in places they would prefer maybe not to live.
Yeah.
What does that place look like? Because particularly in stories, you're not going to have necessarily multiple settings. You mentioned the films I've made. Well, they were low budget films. And so creating a new set and moving the characters anywhere was a big time and sometimes financial investment. So we had to really think hard about that. But as writers, you think about, yeah, these are characters, but where are they going to interact? What kind of situation might bring the sort of conflicts or tensions between them up to the surface a little bit? And who's the character close to, and why? What do they do after work, after school? What are they wearing? How would you describe how they dress? What do they like best about themselves? What do they not like about themselves? So you go internal too, in terms of sort of psychologically analyzing the character.
Mm-hmm.
Are they jealous of anyone? Which often, again, is something beneath the surface that comes out in unexpected ways. And then you think about things you can't control. Give one of their dreams or the fantasies, which we can control, but we can't make like come true. What do they fear most in the world? What do they want most in the world? What are they feeling right now? And so I usually start with people maybe filling out one of those, and sometimes in the process of creating another character or filling out another character sheet, it evolves from this. Like, who are they closest to? Well, that might be another character, and sometimes the other character you end up being more interested in. And one of the things I do in class is have, like in an intro fiction writing class, I'd have students audition their characters to the rest of the class. So they would just read these descriptions out, and then we'll open up for discussion, and we say, well, which of these characters are you most interested in and would like to read about, and why? Are there any of the attributes that you gave to this character, or that the writer gave to this character, that you're particularly interested in, that sort of seems like they're in italics or capital letters, and that you would like to hear more about. And you know, potential conflicts or situations to put them into. So and it's not like we're voting on what character to write about it, but it's useful information in terms of, yeah, you filled this out and maybe you stopped, and maybe other students might want you to go further.
Mhm.
And then there's a writing exercise after this where there's a series of different things that you can, you know, like uh, describe your character entering a room. You know, really basic things that maybe don't necessarily involve what might happen in a story, but nevertheless will give you a sense of, uh, okay, what, sorry.
Well, can I add to this? I wanted to add to
Yeah.
something while you're mentioning that, because when you were talking about peripheral characters, like who the person hangs out with, it made me think about the Harry Potter books again, because
Hmm.
you said he has, it is 3 friends, but I think those 2 friends serve a very specific purpose for Harry, because you have Hermione, who comes from the Muggle world like he does, but she has a very specific knowledge about the Wizarding world because she reads so much. But then you have Ron, who is his family are totally from the Wizarding world. So they both can provide Harry with information about the Wizarding world, which he knows nothing about, right? So Ron has lived it, Hermione has studied it. And throughout the whole series, in one way or another, they are providing him with information about how to move through this world.
Yeah, that's great, because one of the things, particularly in short stories, since everything is compressed, you don't want to have 3 pages of explanation or exposition at the beginning. And
Exactly.
one way to integrate it into the story is having it come from other characters. Other
Yes.
characters, and you create more authority when other characters tells the main character something. That's why one of the standard tropes is like the stranger in a strange land. You take somebody in a certain world and they put them in a different world. Somebody has to explain that world to them. And if you're, as the author, if you're standing in between the character and the reader explaining everything, then you're creating a distance. If there's 2 characters sitting together over coffee, uh, and one knows about the situation they're in, then you can integrate uh, them. So it's a dialogue in fiction, which is another whole thing that maybe I'll talk about at some point. But the it's compressed like poetry is, in that you have you have these people talking in a way that seems ordinary, but it's not replicating real conversation. That's boring, because we keep talking and we fill in with all this stuff. So it gives you the illusion of natural speech. The other thing going along with the kind of Harry Potter example is you have the triangle. And a lot of times, maybe students create a couple characters and they're in a room, and maybe there's a conflict between them. And it sounds like they're both standing on soapboxes debating an issue. But if you've created some other characters, if the story isn't moving, uh, it seems sometimes it doesn't work. But
Mm.
just bring in a character into the room, another character, a third character, and that's going to change the way the first 2 characters talk to each other in terms of expectation and how this other person influences that. And whether you have 2 characters or 3 or 4, though in a story, I'd say in a typical like 10 to 15 page short story, if you have more than a few characters, it's going to be hard for your reader to keep them straight. And one thing about names is you want to make sure the names aren't too close or similar to each other in terms of the characters. I I was doing the final proofs of one of my books of stories, and editor pointed out that these two characters' names, I can't remember what they were, but you could get them mixed up. And you don't want people to mix up your characters, and because you want to just keep them going forward.
Yeah.
So I really believe as a writer in character-based stories because of the emotional investment that's created. And a lot of times you don't have to have a lot of external things happening. So if you have created these characters and just kind of doodled around with them, then you can sort of have a body of knowledge in your head that might make it easier to write and keep your characters consistent. Now, obviously, we behave differently first thing in the morning than we might in the middle of a party somewhere. So that's where the settings come in. So through this exercise, you will have a range of settings to put your character into as well.
Yes.
The home life, the work life, the school life. There's all these different places where there's different things at stake, and your character might not say what they really think. And that's one of the things. Yes, I am also very interested in writing about work. And one of the things, the restrictions of the work environment is that usually there's somebody, your boss, and usually you can't say exactly what you think. I mean, you think of servers in a restaurant. So often they have to keep their mouths shut despite maybe some customers treating them poorly. And so in what situation might they open up about that stuff? And that could be at home or that third place.
Yes.
There's a lot of times the third place idea is a place that's not work and not home. And I think it's a fascinating notion. Somebody many years ago wrote a book called The Third Place. Where do we get together where those two things aren't dominant? And because there's a kind of freedom there to remake ourselves to a certain point. And it's kind of a neutral territory to the third place where you don't have the long history and you don't necessarily have the power structure of a workplace environment. So I think this exercise is a real simple one to do, particularly if you're having trouble with the consistency or generating a character that you feel confident writing about. So sometimes, for example, students who, I live in Pittsburgh, and there's, like a lot of bigger cities, we have an issue with homeless people. And so students would feel sympathy for them, and they try and write a poem or a story about a homeless person, but they didn't have the authority or the knowledge or the chops of the writer to make them seem realistic, like you were saying earlier, to turn a character into a person.
Yes.
And it seems so simple, but it's really so hard. And as soon as I, as a reader, and this is a cross genre, fantasy, sci-fi, mystery, whatever. As soon as I kind of stop accepting or believing in a character, then I'm kind of taken out of the book, and it's hard to get back in.
Yeah.
And so it can be a real challenge. And sometimes you have an idea and you're impatient. You want to just start writing the idea. And so this idea of doing an info sheet on a character does not appeal to many beginning writers, but being forced to slow down can be a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to predict how you might use that info sheet, but having filled it out, it's something else to refer to while you're staring at the blank screen and trying to conjure things up. Yeah. And you change it. You say, well, this character has 3 siblings, and then that's that's like too many, and you just take one out, and you think, well, what's their function in the story? In other words, particularly in short stories, anyone who's in the story, it has to earn their place in there. So simply through their existence in the story, we're assuming that there's a reason for that character being there, and if you take that character out, it's going to change things.
Right.
If you could take the character out and nothing changes, then
Yes.
maybe that character needs to go on the bench and come back in another story.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I love that. Put them on the bench, come back for another story.
Yeah, they're still around.
This is this has been so helpful. And I know that the people doing NaNoWriMo this month will recognize some of this, because I think they fill out sheets like this before November so that they can dive in and do the drafting, having some knowledge of their characters in place. But this is, like you said, this is foundational work, and it makes the drafting that much more smoother. So thank you for sharing that with us today, Jim.
Thank you, Sophfronia.
We are taking applications now for our program. You can find out more about the Alma College MFA in Creative Writing at our website, alma, alma.edu/MFA. I am Sophfronia Scott. He's Jim Daniels. Thanks for watching.